Yesterday, we took a look at the content of discipleship. So in this week's sermon scraps, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about a couple of the comments that I made at the end of, or towards the end of the sermon yesterday, in the fact that there is not a one-size-fits-all in how we go about discipleship. Now, there is the reality that all of us need continual growth as disciples. That's part of where I brought up Philippians 3:12-14, where Paul says, "Not that I have already obtained this or am already perfect." If even Paul, who wrote half the New Testament, is not perfect, has not obtained these things, then what hope do we have? And that's part of what we continue striving on, we continue pressing on, we continue pushing towards the call that Christ has called and commanded us to do and be. So with that said, like there is a not a just one size fits all. Like if you buy a baseball hat, there's usually like one size fits most kind of thing that you can get with it. In discipleship, there's not a one size fits all in terms of what people need when. And there's a tendency for all of us to like project these things that worked for us or things that were helpful to us onto other people, which isn't always helpful for where they're at based on their history, things that are going on in their lives. And honestly, if you look at like most Christian living books, which is like this section of my library here, that's the exact idea that they do. So a couple that were pretty popular recently, David Platt's Radical, Taking Back Your Faith from the American Dream. This one was really interesting, talking about how do we as Americans, which is honestly the wealthiest nation in the world probably that has ever existed, how do we remain faithful stewards with our money? And David Platt's was almost the opposite of prosperity gospel, which is in order to be a true Christian, you have to pursue poverty, and that's an overreach. Like that's too far. So that's something that he needed the reminder of, and in the context that he was living in a very affluent suburban culture, that was a message that his church needed. But that's not necessarily a message that a dear friend of mine that lives, works, and serves as a pastor in blue-collar Pennsylvania at a community of like 200 to 300 people, where he's been for 25 years. That's not the message that he and his people need to be reminded of. They've got different things that they need to focus on. I think of another one. Francis Chan has a tendency to do this with every single one of his books. So Letters of the Church is one of his more recent ones. I just grabbed off the shelf. He's got Crazy Love, Forgotten God, all those kinds of pieces. I feel like Francis just finds one piece of theology that he hadn't learned before and then projects that idea onto everyone else. So everyone else suddenly needs to have this be the most important thing that he is thinking of and being made aware of. And it's almost coming across as if, let me tell you what worked for me, therefore you must follow in my footsteps. There's an element to that that's true, but not completely. And some of this is within human nature. I think we have a tendency to want like easy steps or logical check boxes. So we think of discipleship and we almost put it in like a class format. So we take this class and then we take this class and then that class, and then by the end we are then discipled and we can be done. This also gives us confidence that we can know that we are in the right. The difficulty is the world is a lot more gray than many of us are willing to admit. Now the tools remain the same as far as like we still need God's word, we need prayer, we need the Holy Spirit working within us, we need other people to remind us, but the outworking or the way those tools are made manifest in our lives are going to be different. I was just thinking about this in terms of basketball. So as I've shared, I love basketball, played basketball growing up. One of the things that you notice when you play basketball is everyone has a unique shot. Everyone has a unique way of holding the ball, of like practicing the way that they put the ball in the hoop. They also have a unique way of playing. Like what are they going to emphasize? And even in the positions on the court, like if you are really tall, you're going to play differently than you would if you were a short person. If you are a really good shooter, you're going to play differently than someone who's really good at handling the ball. So there's all these different ways. Like it's the same tools, same fundamentals, like dribbling, passing, shooting, all those kinds of things, but it's going to look differently in terms of how it is made visible in people's lives. So remember, a disciple is a redeemed sinner learning Christ by increasing worship of God through every area of your life, which means there is nothing that is left out. There's nothing that should be left out, because all of us need to grow and some of this is getting to what is known as the lordship of Jesus Christ. So we need to submit every area of our lives to the lordship of Jesus Christ. Now, one example I've heard of this that was helpful for me in thinking about this is think of the day that you become a Christian, you welcome Jesus into a house that you've built, aka, so in this example, a house is your life. So when you become a Christian, you open the door and let Jesus in. and you start like as he comes in, he starts doing some rearranging, and you're content to kind of let him rearrange the entryway, but he's not going to stop there. He's going to continue moving in. So then at some point he's going to start repainting. He's going to start taking down some walls. He's going to start remodeling, which is going to be difficult and painful and challenging and stretching for you, because God wants complete control, wants complete worship of every area of your life, not just one little part of it. Now, some of what this means, just a really quick list. We need discipleship in things like money. Again, this is one that has just struck me recently, how I was talking to my dad about this recently, as I was growing up, or as he was like coming into pastoral ministry in the late 80s, early 90s, the one thing that couldn't be talked about in church was sex. I think today the one thing that can't be talked about in church is money, which is interesting to me, because it seems like our culture always has like some area of our lives that we don't want the church to speak into. Yet that's exactly the area that we probably need to be pushed in to start taking our discipleship in that area more seriously. So I've been having conversations with some friends about this. What does it mean for each one of us to use our money as faithful stewards who are using it as a tool that it is that God has given to us? Now that might mean someone's going to spend money differently than us. So like I've got one friend that spends a lot of money on organic food. I've got other friends that don't spend a lot of money on pretty much anything, and they're completely content to do that. And it would be wrong or sinful to look with dispersion or cast judgment on someone who spends money differently than you. Now that being said, we all need to grow in our generosity, in our ways of finding and using money as a stewardship, as a discipleship tool to continue sharing the good news of what Jesus has done with others. Another area we need discipleship in is parenting. For any of us who are parents, we need help, we need growth, we need to figure out how we can bring our parenting under the lordship of Jesus Christ. Work. What does it mean for you to work in any and every vocation that God has called you to as someone who is a disciple of Jesus Christ, who uses that job at work as a way to make disciples of other people? There's a little study that I've got that's actually I've put together on Right Now Media just for our congregation, that is I think it's called Gospel Shaped Work by Tom Nelson. Tom is an EFCA pastor in Kansas City, Missouri, and he has started a ministry. I think it's called Work Matters, where he's trying to connect what we do on Sunday mornings to Monday through Saturday, which often there's this disconnect. Like we treat Sunday as a separate thing that has nothing to do with what we do on Monday through Saturday, but what we do on Sunday has huge implications for what we should be doing the rest of the week. We need discipleship and Bible reading. What does it mean to grow better in our awareness and interpretation and understanding of how we read and study the Bible? We need discipleship. I've got another friend that reminds me of this regularly in physical health. How do we take care of our bodies? How do we steward the things that we are putting into our bodies, mentally, emotionally, physically, all those areas, which leads us to, we need discipleship in eating and drinking. I've talked about this briefly before, but one of the things I've been contemplating recently as well is I think the call for Christianity is a call to moderation in all areas of life. And I've shared that from the stage before, but so someone came up to me afterwards and said, does that include coffee? And obviously it doesn't include coffee. No, I'm just kidding. It does. So how do we eat and drink even in a way that is a faithful steward of what God has given, using like times I think it's helpful looking back at the Old Testament sometimes, because the nation of Israel had times of fasting and times of feasting, but then most of it was just like ordinary time where you had just enough to live and survive and thrive, but not more. And yet we need to have times of feasting like we did this past Thursday for Thanksgiving. We also need times of fasting where we intentionally remove those things. We need discipleship and retirement. What does it look like for us to retire well, to use our retirement as faithful stewards who are continuing to make disciples? For grandparenting, even for church, what does it mean for us to be a church, to continue making disciples, keeping that the sole focus and purpose? Like there's a lot of other organizations that do a lot of really great work. The church is called the one thing and one thing only that makes us unique among any other human organization, that is the gospel. We as the church are the only one that can continue making disciples. So, how do we bring all those things under the lordship of Jesus Christ? Well, we need to learn something new mentally. I think it's like we need to be told things that we don't know, because I have heard this recently. There's a book that came out a few years ago called The Death of Expertise, where because of the internet and our access to just information whenever we want it, everyone assumes that they can become an expert on whatever issues that you want to have. Micah actually texted me after like COVID kind of subsided last year. Someone Well, so yeah, COVID subsided at the beginning of this year, really, and then the war in Ukraine started. And so he sent me a tweet where someone said, after a good 18-month run as an expert in epidemiology and pandemics, I have now decided to become an expert in Ukraine, socioeconomic, and wartime theory, which is just like a funny way of summarizing this idea that all of us now approach these things as if we're experts, but we don't know what we don't know. So even as in our training and our growth, we need to learn something mentally that we maybe didn't know of before, and then we need to see it evidenced or practiced by other people. This is somewhere we need the body. We need all of us working in our own unique areas of gifts, of strength, of weakness, so that we can see what we should be pursuing individually in these areas of our lives as well. I also think it's interesting, like there has been over my lifetime, I think there's been a resurgence or a recovery of a lot of the spiritual disciplines. So when I went to undergrad, I started reading some books by, and I'm not trying to endorse everything that these people have written, but things like Dallas Willard or Richard Foster, some of those more experiential and at times mystical aspects of our faith that I feel like were underemphasized as I was growing up. So one of the books I read recently that I don't have, because I keep loaning it out to people, is called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by a guy named John Mark Comer. It was a helpful reminder for me, so I'll summarize it briefly for you because I can't keep loaning it out to every person. But he said we as Christians today in America have just become so busy and hurried in everything of our lives, and it distracts us and does not allow us the time for contemplation, for meditation, for focusing our eyes, our minds, our gaze on what we need to focus on. Like I think of Philippians 3 again. We forget what lies behind, straining forward to what lies ahead. If we're so busy and distracted all the time, we can't do that. So he said has 4 S's that kind of serve as a summary of what he encourages people to pursue. One is silence and solitude, which it's really hard to find silence today most of the time. Second is Sabbath. Third is simplicity. And the fourth is slowing. The ones that have stood out to me as I was thinking through this are the Sabbath and the simplicity, because those are not things that come naturally or easily to me. But if we want to become people who are disciples, who are making disciples, those are some of the things that we need to make a commitment to recover in our own lives. As I was preparing for sermon scraps this morning, I was reminded of 1 Thessalonians 4:11, which says, "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life." I've read, heard, studied, thought about that verse many times over my life. But what does that mean to live a life that is so content in who God has created you to be, that you're content not making noise, not complaining, not grumbling, not focusing or fixating on yourself, but looking for ways to love, serve, and care for the people around you, which is making and maturing disciples of Jesus. So that's a little bit on the idea that I've got on some of what it means to not have a one-size-all. Like, yes, the Bible is the primary motivator and driver. And even as I was thinking about this again, connected to some of what I said about encouragement the week before, use the Bible as a way to encourage someone this week. Send them a text, write them a letter, find ways, maybe even if you're going to Target, just smile at someone, be encouraging. Don't take out your phone when you're in the line, maybe even get in the slow lane when you're driving up to the cities, if that's where you're going to be going. But think through what does it mean for you to begin living out some of these truths that we are studying together. This next week, we're going to look at the idea of imitating me, which is somewhat I talked about today. Like, we need examples of people who are doing this well. The primary passage on Sunday will be 1 Corinthians 11:1, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So be thinking about that. It's an easy one to memorize and meditate on this next week, and hopefully we'll see you on Sunday morning.